So on Sunday, French President Emmanuel Macron said that he convinced President Trump to change his mind and keep troops in Syria long term.
But one day later, after pushback from the Trump White House, Macron now says that he did not mean that. I-24 News French correspondent and analyst Christian Millar explains.
If we cannot say that French President Macron played the greater role in the Syrian attacks, let's say that siding with his American and British allies, he did contribute to the success of the military operation. Now, there is no doubt that Macron and Trump were on the same wavelengths, considering it was time a clear signal should be sent to Bashar al-Assad for not crossing over again the red line with the use of chemical arms. Now, I must admit, French public opinion wonders where the truth lies when, on the one hand, Macron said he convinced Donald Trump not to remove these troops from Syria, and on the other hand, his purposes were denied by the White House press office. There are, in fact, some bones of contention between the two. Macron thinks Trump would make a major mistake leaving Syria to the hands of the Russians and the Iranians who want to provoke a war with Israel. Macron thinks he can be a mediator between all the protagonists of the crisis. Trump is right to think it's just wishful thinking. Macron thinks also Trump would make a major mistake dropping the Iranian nuclear agreement. On this specific case, I think Trump is right to think that former US President Obama was too naive, gullible to believe the Iranian regime would be an asset to stabilize Middle East. We see the results today.
All right, and as we mentioned before, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley had a differing opinion on Russian sanctions than the White House, and now she's got a differing opinion on Syrian strategy as well.
That's right. The White House says the U.S. main goal is to defeat Islamic State, not necessarily to contain Iran. But take a look at what Haley said yesterday. Watch.
We want to make sure that the influence of Iran doesn't take over the area. They continue to cause problems throughout the region, and we want to make sure that there is a hold. The president has asked the allies to step up and do more when it comes to Syria, and so all of these things are being done in the name of bringing our military home.
To discuss all this, let's bring in Matthew RJ Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew, great to have you on the program as always. So what should the priority be? Should it be containing Iran, as Haley seemed to suggest, or should it be the final cleanup mission involving Islamic State?
The Islamic State is still there, but the greater strategic threat to the United States is absolutely Iran, and they have gained a tremendous amount from their involvement in the Syrian civil war. It poses a threat to not only the United States, but of course our allies in the region. And I think it's very important that we finally saw the president himself enunciate this axis of resistance of Assad and Putin and Iran all as one, instead of just focusing on ISIS. Unfortunately, our military is still very much focused on ISIS, and it is the Defense Department's plan of the three options given to President Trump on what to strike and what to deal with last week on Friday. They chose the Defense Department's intermediate to weaker plan, which is really not going to do anything to deter Iran, which, again, needs to be where our focus is.
Okay, Iran, ISIS, but what about the Syrian people themselves? I know President Trump is getting a lot of praise for stepping in and doing something, but tens of thousands of Syrians have been killed by conventional weapons.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, the strike on 3 targeted chemical weapons facilities, this may deter and degrade Assad's ability to use chemical weapons or force him to think long and hard before using them again. But remember, the really bad agreement that Obama made in 2013 was to remove all the chemical weapons. So basically, we're taking, instead of making a red line, we're basically drawing a pink line that was originally an invisible line that Obama drew. This really does not go far enough. It's not going to change any calculation long term, and it's back to war as usual. Again, we need to stop doing a fix-it job to a really bad Obama policy, which is essentially the focus on ISIS. That is to lock in Iran's gains in Syria. We need to embark on a new policy. And once we do that, I think we'll be able to fix things a lot more quickly.
But there's nothing that precludes the United States or anybody else with a coalition from attacking Iran bases in Syria or anywhere else if the United States feels the need to do so. It seems like this was simply just a narrowly focused attack on Syria's use of chemical weapons and perhaps a psychological message to Hezbollah and Iran and other players in Syria.
Right, that may be the case, but still a little bit more can be done. I'm not discounting the importance of what he did. Doing nothing would have been absolutely horrible, whether he said he was going to do something on Twitter or not. That, you know, to actually take a course of action was definitely important. But I think going forward, I don't think Iran got much of a message other than it really didn't involve them. And Russia, again, all of these countries were scattering right after Trump tweeted, so we know the amount of fear that just the warning Trump can create out of just his words. But I think the more important aspect is that we translate it into a policy, because right now we just have words and rhetoric and thoughts, but we're not affecting on the ground what is happening with Iran. We don't lack, with what we currently have militarily there, the ability to do a lot more, but we just lack the will and the purpose to do so.
So just to be clear, are you advocating the U.S. gets more involved in Syria? Because President Trump campaigned on getting the U.S. out of the Middle East.
Right. Well, I'm advocating that the United States would take a series of steps regarding Syria. I don't think the United States needs to do much more currently militarily. It has around 2,000 troops there. It can work with other Sunni forces. It already has the Syrian Democratic Forces. It needs Sunni allies. It needs to turn its focus onto Iran. It already has presence along the land corridors that Iran is using to create its Shia crescent, and to finish that, it can remain there and it can put pressure on Assad. I mean, by camping out where it is right now, literally in the eastern region, it is sitting on top of vast oil fields, which, of course, Iran would like to have and Syria would like to have to direct toward reconstruction in the country after the war. If the United States can control that, then it won't just go to Assad and for him to continue starving his people. That represents just the beginnings of a much better and effective plan that would push back on Iran and not just simply allow their rule to continue as it is and boost their presence in the region.
Matthew RJ Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew, thanks as always for coming on. We appreciate it.
I'm just struck about what's going on between Haley and President Trump, because she's always been a freelancer. She's tough on Russia. She even said people that accuse the president of sexual harassment should be heard, and he's always left her alone at the UN, but now that's changing?
Yeah, now it seems like he's suggesting that she's too far over her skis, that she's too far ahead of him, but you wonder, well, why then did he allow her to go out on the Sunday shows and say all this different stuff to begin with? In any case, it's an interesting bit of friction between them, perhaps.
Yeah, there's speculation she may run in 2020 against him, but speculation. All right, coming up, a Russian reporter mysteriously dies after reporting on Russian activity in Syria. The reporter fell off his balcony a day after masked men visited his apartment.
And in Turkey, as an American pastor is put on trial for allegedly helping in the 2016 failed coup against the government, further escalating tensions between Turkey and Washington.